Brendan, we were talking about it, and I want to share this with the listeners tonight. You said that you didn't know what you looked like. When you actually thought about it, underneath the weight, you didn't know what Brendan actually looked like.
No, the real me, all this extra layer of blubber or whatever. I could never really visualize what I looked like minus that, because I'd had it my entire life. I had no frame of reference to go by. I found goal setting really, really difficult because I literally had no idea about what I was capable of ultimately becoming.
Kyle, in a psychotherapist point of view, what do we call that when we can't visualize? Because we've talked about this on the show before about being able to visualize change. We talk about it, self-mantras, even just telling yourself, I can.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the story of the little engine that could. I think I can. So what do we call the absence of that in a mental health point of view?
Well, I think one of the things that's really striking about your story, Brendan, is you describe really clearly always being overweight, always being fat. And so, it became part of your identity. It was a part of your identity. And so, as you say, Hamish, not being able to visualise that, but also I think that the thing, to state the really blindingly obvious, change is really hard.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about this so much on this show, that even change that we know is for the better, that we know is what we need to do, that we know is what we should do, even when the problems are staring us in the face, even the problems are screaming at us in the face, change is really hard. And one of the things that I've heard Brendan describe really clearly is you talk about essentially how dangerous it was to hope that things could be different, right? You tried everything. It hadn't worked. And actually, I really, really liked how you sort of talked yourself into it, right? I'm going to try it, but just to prove them wrong.
Yeah, the reasons weren't perhaps the most noble for
whatever
getting
gets
into
you there,
it. But
whatever
hey, a
works.
reason is a reason. That was my pathway into it. Just to come back to a point you were making before, just sort of, if I may, about how change is hard.
Yeah.
Can I engage the nerd side of my personality for a moment? I'm going to tell you a Star Trek story. There's a scene in Star Trek, and this will all make sense if I just have a minute here. If you're into Star Trek, everybody will tell you that the best Star Trek movie is the second one, right? The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
There's a certain scene in that movie where the Enterprise it's on its way to a space station, and it just wants to give them a sort of, hey, heads up, we're on our way, just to let them know that they're on their way. And the space station doesn't respond. And Kirk thinks, oh, that's a bit weird. And then, Mr. Spock pipes up in a way that only Mr. Spock can. He says there are two possibilities. They are unable to respond. They are unwilling to respond. So these two possibilities. When I look back upon my experience, having carried all this extra for so long, and everybody's sort of pointing it at me, that comes from a place where these people tend to have assumed that I was unwilling.
Yeah.
That's kind of the implication when they point the finger at me, that I was unwilling. But I can tell you, having been in that place, it wasn't a happy place. All I wanted was to be a good boy, right? To be normal, to belong, to fit in. So I've got every motivation in the world to want to do these things that people are telling me to do. It was never a lack of willingness for me. It was a lack of ability.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties into this whole notion of fat shaming that periodically does the rounds in the media as well. I would say that fat shaming is kind of, in my mind at least, kind of like the byproduct or the consequence of this mistaken assumption that anybody can just lose weight and it's not a problem, that it's easy, and if they can't, then that's because they lack the desire, they're not strong enough, they lack willpower. Yeah. It's a personal judgment,
and it's very similar to the moral judgment we make about any addiction. If we think of weight and food as a kind of addiction as well, we assume that the person is doing it because there's something wrong with them, and they're doing something bad and wrong as a consequence. What it does is it simplifies a very complicated problem.